Hey guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and in this video we're going to look at 3 garage/workshop organization ideas and see if we can build them for cheaper than we can buy them. Basically, I'm going to show you how to build each one, and then we'll break down the cost versus the inspiration or the store-bought version and see if we were any better off. In case you're curious, here's what we'll be building: a heavy-duty shelving unit, a small space workbench, and a simple storage shelf with a cabinet. So if you're ready to dive in and get building, let's go. Let's start with the simplest project first, the heavy-duty shelving unit. This shelving unit was designed to be beefy, so I used 2x4s for the frame. The full cut list and cut diagrams can be found in the printable plans that I've linked below. But essentially, I trimmed down 4 corner posts or legs, 8 long supports that will run along the length of each shelf, and 6 short supports that will run along the depth of each shelf.
So this is the Craig XL pocket hole jig, and it doesn't really look that big until you compare it to the standard size jig, and you can see that it's significantly larger. So it's got larger holes, so you use it with a larger drill bit, and then you also use it with larger screws, like these XL pocket hole screws. They claim that the XL screws are 2 times stronger than the standard size screws. Unless you're gonna park a tractor on one of the shelves, the standard size is probably more than enough. But because I already have it and I already have the screws, I'm just gonna go ahead and use the XL for your basic Christmas ornaments and whatever typical, not really that heavy garage things that you'd probably be storing on these shelves. The standard size jig would work totally fine.
I drilled pocket holes into the ends of all 8 long supports and into the ends of half of the short supports. Again, you can drill these with either a standard sized pocket hole jig or an XL pocket hole jig. Just keep in mind that you need to use XL screws with XL pocket holes and standard screws with standard size pocket holes. It does kind of stink in this case because the XL screws come in a pack of 30 and you need 64 total pocket hole screws. I didn't think ahead and I only bought 2 packs, so it ended up being 4 screws short and I had to use other screws that I had on hand. Whoops. That's okay, it'll be fine. I assembled the 2 front and back frames using the long supports and the corner posts. Then I attached 4 short supports on each side so that they were all even with the long supports. To complete the frame, I added 2 more short supports just evenly spaced across each shelf. I used some inexpensive 1/2-inch pine sheathing for the shelving. Actually, it was 15-30 seconds sheathing. It's just easier to say 1/2 inch. I ripped 2 strips from each sheet to the depth of my frame, then I trimmed them down to the length of my frame. Now the top shelf can simply be set on top and screwed in place, but the bottom 3 shelves need the corners notched out to fit around the legs. So I marked each corner about 1 5/8 by 3 5/8 and cut these with a jigsaw. The 2x4 legs are actually an 1/8 inch smaller than that in both directions, but I just cut these a little oversized to allow some wiggle room. Once the shelves were all in place, I secured them to the frame with screws around the edge, and with that, this simple heavy-duty shelf is ready to load up. I know you'll want to know how much weight these shelves can hold, and I don't have a definite answer because it depends on several factors, like the exact type of screws that you used, how well it was assembled, and the condition of the wood that you used. But each shelf, if properly assembled, can hold at least several hundred pounds. Now let's talk about cost. This is the inspiration that I based this build off of. Now we're obviously comparing apples to oranges here because this shelf is wood and the inspiration shelf is metal. So it's not exactly the same thing. However, it did have similar dimensions, the same number of shelves, and is comparable in durability. The price? $250. This shelf required 13 2x4s, 2 sheets of 1/2-inch sheathing, 64 pocket hole screws, and 2 boxes of wood screws for a total of $125. So this was about half the cost to build versus buy. All right, let's move to the second project, a small workbench. This is my personal favorite of the three. To kick this project off, I cut 4 pieces of 2x4 to fit together to make a simple frame about the size that I wanted my workbench. I assembled this using pocket holes and screws, then I cut a piece of 3/4 inch plywood to fit on top. Now for this project, I did splurge for cabinet grade birch, but you could use a cheaper plywood if you really wanted. After I screwed this piece onto the frame, I cut 2x4 corner posts, or legs, to go at each corner. You could absolutely attach these with pocket holes, but I just used 3-inch wood screws through the bottom. This is how I attached the legs on my larger workbench many years ago, and it's held up well. Once these legs were installed, I assembled the rest of the frame with 2x4s, pocket holes, and screws. Now, you'll see this shortly, but in hindsight, after attaching the top pieces of the frame, I should have stopped and attached the workbench top before adding the shelf. I have noted this in the printable plans for this project that I've linked below, but at this point, I haven't realized my mistake here yet, so I continued on and added a 2x4 frame for the shelf. I cut to fit and screwed a piece of plywood over this frame, and here's where I realized my mistake. Okay, so I was gonna attach the top. Actually, honestly, I didn't think about how I was gonna attach the top until I got to this point. So I thought about doing pocket holes up through the tops of the framing, but since this shelf is already in place, I don't have enough room to get the drill bit and the drill up to drill the pocket holes. So I should have attached the top and then attached this, but whoops. Instead of using pocket holes, I'll just drive the screw at an angle. And I'll show you that in just a second, but I just wanted to explain why I'm not using actual pocket holes for these screws, because I just don't have enough room to drill the holes. Ideally, I would have attached this top with pocket holes and screws, but I made do and just drove some screws at an angle through the top frame. This is essentially a pocket hole, there just isn't a pocket. You could also attach this top using corner brackets or figure-8 fasteners or Z-clips or hundreds of other ways, but this just seemed the easiest at the time. While I had this flipped over, I installed caster wheels at each corner to make this workbench mobile. At this point, it's complete, but I had some leftover plywood and I really wanted to make the most out of it. So I cut a piece to fit into one side. Then I laid out and assembled some simple little cubbies or boxes to hold things like glue, drill bits, sandpaper, etc. I also cut a piece that could hold my drill and driver. And I laid all of these out and arranged them so that they would fit on my panel, then attached them with screws from the backside. I drilled 2 pocket holes on the back side of this panel, and actually in hindsight, I should have drilled these before I attached the pieces to the front, but anyway. Then I slid this panel back into place and attached it at the bottom with pocket hole screws and just screwed in at the top to the shelf frame. On the other side, I screwed 2 strips between the legs that would house some clamps. I used 6-inch and 12-inch clamps to just kind of hang on here and help me determine my spacing. And with that, this simple workbench is complete and is packed full of handy little cubbies and storage accessories. Now let's break down the cost. Here's the inspiration that I built this project off of. Now note that it doesn't have the customized storage on the sides or caster wheels, but it is the same overall dimension and the same basic design. The price is $200, and again, note that that does not include the wheels. The one that I built here used 1 sheet of birch plywood, 6 2x4s, screws, and there were multiple types of screws, so I just lumped them all together, and caster wheels for a total of about $136. So this project was also cheaper to build versus buy, and the built one has customized storage and caster wheels, so it's a definite upgrade. Okay, so now the final project, a storage piece with cabinets and shelves. I started with the cabinet part first, so I cut down my plywood sheet to make the bottom and sides of the box. I assembled this with pocket holes and screws, then I brought out a piece of 1/2-inch plywood to cut the back from. Now, in full transparency, I used a leftover piece of 1/2-inch birch plywood that I already had in my shop for the back. Later, I'll use the leftover plywood pieces from the heavy-duty shelf that I shared earlier in the video for the shelves. So all of the 1/2-inch plywood pieces used here were not cut from a single sheet, but they could have been if I had just had one. I was just trying to avoid buying another sheet that I didn't really need. Anyway, once the back was on, I attached a 3/4-inch plywood top, then moved on to making the shelf. The shelf frame was made using 2x4s for the corner post and 2x2s for the shelf supports. I ripped my 2x2s from 2x4s, but you can absolutely buy pre-cut 2x2s if you'd rather. After I trimmed these pieces to length, I drilled pocket holes into the ends of all the 2x2s, then assembled the 2 side frames with pocket hole screws. Once both side frames were together, I attached them to each side of the cabinet so that it was about 1.5 inches up from the bottom of the corner posts. Then I attached the front and back 2x2 shelf supports with pocket holes and screws so that they were even with the sides. Now I needed to add the shelves, but just like with the heavy-duty shelf that I shared first, the top shelf can be screwed in as is, but the bottom 2 need notches cut out to fit around the corners. I cut these with a jigsaw, then placed and screwed them onto the supports. At this point, there's still enough 3/4-inch plywood to cut 2 double doors to go on the cabinet. So I added these with concealed hinges and then added some knobs to wrap up this project. There's actually still enough plywood left. If you wanted to add a shelf inside the cabinet, you absolutely could. But I was making this for my dad and he didn't want the shelf, so I just skipped it. This isn't as heavy duty as the first shelf, but these shelves can still hold plenty, and the cabinet is great for odds and ends that you don't want to see all the time. Now let's break down the cost. Here's the inspiration that I built this project based off of. It has similar dimensions, number of shelves, and basic overall design. The price, $214. This shelf required 5 2x4s, assuming that you cut your 2x2s from 2x4s, 1 sheet of 3/4 inch plywood, 1 sheet of 1/2 inch plywood, and a few different types of screws. Oh, and 2 pair of hinges, for a total of $158. You may have already guessed at the beginning that all of these would have been cheaper to build than to buy, but I hope that you still enjoyed seeing the actual builds, then comparing the numbers. Prices of materials and these inspiration products that I've shown will change over time and will vary by location. So these numbers won't be relevant forever, but the projects will be. You can grab the plans to build your own in the description below, and if you're anxious to see more, I've got so many more projects to come, so be sure to subscribe and stay tuned. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!